And I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors, Patrick Arp and Lindsay White, who are here to take all the difficult questions at the end of the presentation. So, as has been said, life expectancy has increased worldwide, but healthy aging isn't necessarily universal. And, cognitive impairment is the leading cause of disability and mortality in high-income countries currently. And as mentioned, we're expecting that trend to continue in lower-income countries as time goes on. And while there are many predictors and things we can do about cognitive decline, age remains the #1 predictor for cognitive function. And this is kind of the model that we have in mind of your age-related cognitive changes. So about the time when you're 40s, that's when you're running marathons, at least for some people. And you're sort of thinking about, how does the cognition go over, how does it change over time? Around age 40 is when adults start to experience changes in the quality of your cognitive function. And that dotted line at the bottom is really sort of where it starts impacting your daily activities. And you really sort of can't sustain normal routine activities like paying your bills on time or driving and things like that. And the inflection point within this graphic is somewhat arbitrary. There's a lot of attention trying to figure out what is the relationship of things that we can do or things that are sort of biologically innate in us to keep us on these orange or blue or green lines and not sort of dipping below and crossing the barrier to where our cognitive function is really changing our ability for maintaining independence. And this quest for identifying factors really focuses on modifiable factors, right? We mentioned a lot of them earlier about diet and exercise, but one of the other things that is a modifiable potential factor is a decision that hopefully we are all lucky enough to make, and that is the timing of retirement. When and where and how we retire. And there's a lot of variation in retirement within the US currently. Due to a mix of economic, demographic, and social policy behaviors and determinations. So even in the US, where we have like a universal social security system with set ages, we actually see a lot of variation in average retirement ages across the different states. Nationally, we're at an average retirement age of 64, with state averages ranging from the lightest color states at 61 to the darkest color states where the average retirement age is in the 67 range. And so first we sort of wanted to think about what are the reasons why cognitive function or cognitive decline could be related to retirement and work behavior. And there are two primary theories in this literature. First is the cognitive reserve theory. And this really became very popular and originated in the late 1980s when we started being able to see in autopsy age-related and dementia-related signs in people's brains among people who didn't actually ever have any signs or reports of cognitive decline or dementia in their daily life before they passed away. And so the idea is that essentially your brain can sort of, with a lot of training and a lifetime of education and curiosity, can sort of develop, shortcuts to kind of circumvent the problems that the plaques and taus accumulation could be developing that's consistent with advanced Alzheimer's disease. And so the idea behind the cognitive reserve theory is really that, if you have a lot of education and your brain can become nimble, you can kind of overcome some of the biological aging that's happening. And so your cognitive decline as reported or experienced is very different than what is happening biologically. So that's one theory that we have. The second one is the use it or lose it theory. And that's basically coming from, your brain is a muscle. If you use it a lot, it can stay strong and healthy. And if you don't use it a lot, right, then it's going to atrophy. And that could be the things that lead to cognitive decline. How it relates to retirement really then becomes a function of what do you do in your job? What are your work characteristics? How cognitively demanding is it? How stressful is it? Because we know stress isn't necessarily good for your cognition, and how much autonomy you have. but it's also related to then the behaviors and the activities and cognitive tasks that you do after retirement. And this theory really then sort of argues that we should be seeing a lot of heterogeneity or a lot of variation among people about the relationship between retirement and health, or cognitive health and cognitive decline, based on what they actually do. So these two hypotheses have two testable theories that come out of it. So first, in the cognitive reserve, you could see people who have highly cognitive demanding occupations should be protective against cognitive decline. Because again, if you're very active, you have a lifetime of education or learning something new every day, your brain is still agile and to overcome anything that's happening biologically. And like I mentioned, the use it or lose it is really about a lot of heterogeneity. So retirement from cognitively demanding occupations should be related to a slower decline, a faster rate of decline if you are no longer doing these cognitively demanding tasks, and higher level of participation of enriching activities in retirement would actually lead to slower rates of decline. So in order to answer what was actually going on, we went to a systematic review. This picture basically just means that we read a lot of papers, so you don't have to. And so there's two primary types of literature that I'm going to summarize here. If you want to know more about the individual papers, or for the academics in the room, if you want to know if your paper is cited, I'm happy to share you the paper. But here we're just going to talk about sort of the generalizable findings that we've had. So first, there are correlational studies. So these are studies that are basically looking at people who retire early, comparing individuals who retire late, or say at age 65, let's look at people and compare them, people who are currently working versus people who had already retired. But they're not really going to address why anyone retired, right? Which could be related to health, cognitive decline, right? So it's really about comparing people without taking into account sort of how they got to where they are. And they don't address why people may have retired. So there is a risk of bias when you're trying to think about like what is the causal effect of retirement on cognitive decline. And there's the other thing to note in this literature writ large is that there's a variety of measures of cognitive function, cognitive decline, or dementia, and which makes it very difficult to come up with sort of this is the finding, because every survey is using different data and different measures of cognitive function. But overall, what we find is that in the correlational studies, they're more likely to find that retirement is associated with a decline in cognitive function or lower cognitive function. And this is particularly noticeable for people who retire earlier. And the earlier they retire, the sort of more detrimental retirement seems to be. But there is substantial heterogeneity based on gender and occupational characteristics. So that is consistent with this sort of second theory. There's a second line of literature, which, I'm an economist, so I'm going to call it the economics literature, that is really trying to get at the causal mechanisms behind retirement and address those so that you can really get the effect of retirement on cognition itself. This means that there's a low risk of bias because we're really trying to get at this causal mechanism by estimating the local average treatment effect, or the late measure of the effect of retirement on cognition. But because we're also using these different data sets than necessarily some of the biological researchers are using, we have very limited sets of cognitive measures in this type of literature. And they also have a very short time span because of limitations in longevity of the data sets. And we argue that we actually think it's relatively inconclusive of the relationship between retirement on cognitive health or cognitive decline. Most likely, we kind of get the sense that perhaps there's no effect, or maybe a slight negative effect, that retirement could be bad for your cognition, or perhaps it's sort of a neutral effect. But again, there's very important heterogeneity that we find, or the literature finds, based on occupation and gender. But there is a lot of limitations both in the economics literature and the literature writ large. So we are, in the economics literature, only looking at the local average treatment effect, which means For those who are retiring at age 66 because their Social Security age, full retirement age, increased from 65 to 66, right? Those are the people that we're estimating the effect for. Does that represent most people in this room? Probably not, right? And so the generalizability is kind of a problem. In general, it's also very hard to document in these papers and data sets the pathways to retirement. So are you doing part-time? Did you sort of change jobs first? Do you have a bridge job, right? All of that can, is it because the company was, potentially closing down and so that is why you're retiring? And the activities in retirement, I think, is really, really important. So how cognitively engaged are you? Are you doing volunteer work afterwards? Are you, continuing to work part-time after you retire from your primary job? That's missing from a lot of these data sets. And so it's hard to capture and really sort of quantify the effect of the use it or lose it theories. The other thing I just want to highlight is there's, for the generalizability for, people who retire at age 65 is one thing, and for females it's particularly difficult because of the generational changes in who is working full-time at age 65. If we're looking, at the results that we can do with data for people who are currently 85 or 90, right, that's going to be very different implications, or at least a very different cohort than people who are currently 40 and working full-time for women. And so with that, I was just going to say, because I'm getting the warnings, so both types of study do sort of have some support for the use it or lose it theory. So maybe your brain really is a muscle and we need to keep it exercised no matter what we're doing, with mixed support for the cognitive reserve theory. We need to be thinking about cognitively stimulating activities and social activities in retirement. I think really thinking about what does retirement mean. The average American male, when they retire, increases their TV watching. It's maybe not what we want to be doing, and we need to be thinking about how can we engage, especially as we have this bolus of people retiring and getting in older ages, how can we keep everyone sort of vitally involved? And the other thing I think to keep in mind is that there's more and better data on the way. So we have more data about, we're linking cognitive data from biological studies to retirement data from the IRS or from, survey data. And so there really is a lot data coming along the way. So, like any good researcher, I want to work forever. So it ends with a call for more research. I think that we have some really good evidence or really good opportunities to contribute to this evidence going forward. So thank you.